Audio. Hello, good morning.
Good morning. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm okay, thanks. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
This is you're David, right? Owino.
Yes, this is David Owino. I've had a bit of a problem with this device.
Oh, okay. Well, the connection looks good right now. I can see you well. I can hear you well. Thanks for reconnecting. I didn't see the message that your colleague Duncan sent until just now, so I missed it yesterday. Sorry about that.
No problem. I thought so because there was a lot of messages in the. I mean, it was a chain of replies, and it was very
Right.
possible.
Okay. No, I must have marked it as read in my inbox, and I was a bit overwhelmed with emails yesterday, so I just missed it completely. Anyway, thanks for reconnecting now.
Thank you very much. So it must be very early in Switzerland.
Oh no, I'm in
Possibly.
Nairobi. I'm in Nairobi.
Oh, you're in Nairobi?
Can't you see my Maasai beads on the wall behind me? This is my signature. There's a few more around.
Well, they travel the
So
world.
yeah, no, I'm in. It's interesting, isn't it, on this digital sort of world we're now living in? But I run one of. I'm actually responsible for two global programs.
Uh,
But for historical reasons, I ended up based in Nairobi. This is our regional office, as you probably know, and
yeah,
I'm hosted here as part of the regional program. But my responsibilities are global. Most of my team is in Nairobi, but a few of them are also in Switzerland.
yeah. So that's in you, your office is in Current, isn't it?
Well, Langata, do you know the Makoma
Yeah.
estate?
Yes.
Sort of behind the Multimedia University there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, I was living those sides. Um,
I
some.
don't actually. I live in pretty. I can see the CBD right through the trees outside my window. So, for my wife and my kids, it's easier to be central, and then I do the nice commute out into the suburbs. I did. I mean, again, pre-COVID, I'm enjoying COVID. It forces me to stay at home and avoid the terrible traffic.
I'm telling you, that road,
Oh man,
that
awful.
road, that road
And it's
is.
back to normal, by the way. I was there to the office. I went to the office on Tuesday for the first time in a few weeks, and coming home, it was back. The traffic was like normal, full
It's like normal. I
traffic.
mean, it is.
Amazing, huh?
There was just like a few weeks break, like 2 weeks, and then I think people said, we can't live like this.
Yeah, yeah. No, anyway, so whatever, we carry on. Yeah. So tell
All
me
right.
about you. You were connected with us and with particularly with Caroline through there, there was some kind of conference, wasn't there, on nature-based solutions? Is that right?
Yes, yes. So I'm a journalist, and I'm based here in Nairobi. I am
Hmm.
a correspondent for Africa News,
Okay.
but I also run a media startup. It's called Zulani TV. So it's
Okay.
basically producing development content for different broadcasters, including KTN here in Kenya.
All right. Okay.
So we have an association which we started way back in 2013. It's an association for journalists and communicators who are reporting on disasters, climate, and sustainable development in general. And
Right.
so the main thing about the association was to create a space in which we could do peer mentorship, because all of us were struggling with telling these stories, and
Hmm.
people were asking, how do you tell a disaster story when there is no disaster? How do how
Right.
do you, yeah, and there are always complaints that, no, how is it you guys are only reporting on the numbers and that's it? I mean, there's much more to this conversation. So I said, okay,
Right. Right.
maybe there is. We didn't know that if there was at that time. So
Hmm.
we formed an association through which we could help each other learn.
Yeah.
And so it is through this association, DIRAJ, which we had the nature-based solutions webinar with Bora,
Yeah.
Caroline, and one of your former colleagues. Her name is
Oh
Fabiola
yeah.
Monti.
Monte. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So So it was great. I mean,
All right.
now I'm seeing people in their reports trying to say, every time there's a story, I see people in the WhatsApp group say, okay, I think there's a chance for a nature-based solution angle there. So,
It's good that it's taking off. I
it's
think there's
beginning
something
to be.
about the name nature-based solution, which is attention grabbing in a way that some
Yes.
other term. I mean, it's not really absolutely new. It's pulling together things that have been around for a while, but it's putting them in a package that people can kind of intuitively pick up, and I think that's important, Otherwise, a
Yeah.
lot of these things, you're saying, well, how do you report the disaster when the disaster doesn't happen? That's the problem. You fix the problem, and everyone's like, oh, we don't have a problem then. And it's like, no, hang on a minute. If you
Yeah.
don't keep doing this, if you don't keep protecting nature, you're going to have the problem again. We're very good at taking nature for granted, and I mean, so many services that we get from nature. So I'm preaching now, but anyway, it's true.
Yeah, preaching.
Yeah, a little bit. Well, that's my job, so that's fine. That's why we're doing the interview, right? So it's okay.
No problem at all. So, yeah, I prepared a few questions here.
Sure.
Uh, our one of the project that we are featuring is in central Kenya.
Okay.
It's these guys are producing fertilizer using rice husks, which for a long time the people of Mwea did not know what to do with. Now at least it's earning them money, and they're getting back very good fertilizer for their rice. So we can start.
Yeah, away, please. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So we know that agriculture is a major contributor of the greenhouse gases that are causing climate change, that are driving climate change. But now this report is talking about soil health. How big a factor is that?
Well, I mean, first of all, land is the biggest store of carbon on the planet, pretty much. I mean, if you compare the amount of carbon in the atmosphere and the amount of carbon in all the vegetation added together, it's still less than all the carbon that's stored in the world's soils. So it's an extremely important repository. Agricultural land in particular largely is quite depleted in carbon, particularly cultivated land. Once you plough the land, some of that carbon is lost through farm management practices, often over many, many years. The total amount of carbon is reduced. I've read somewhere something like about 60% of all the soil carbon stocks have been lost from agricultural land. So over time, that's made a significant contribution, certainly. Perhaps more importantly, though, is that there's more and more interest in farming approaches that restore the carbon to the soil. Mostly that's done by kind of restoring the health of the land and restoring the biodiversity of the soil. Soil biodiversity is something that most people don't find particularly exciting, but I think farmers understand very much how important that is for maintaining productivity, for maintaining soil moisture. It reduces the risk and it increases the productivity of farming. And those practices also help to capture carbon from the atmosphere and lock it away in the soil. There's still quite a bit of debate about exactly which practices work and how and where, but it's moving pretty quickly, and there's a lot of interest in sort of shifting farming practices away from the sort of conventional approach, which is very much based on high application of external inputs, and looking more at sort of working with nature, restoring the land health, and using that as the basis of productive and resilient farming systems.
You mentioned there soil biodiversity. Maybe we should break this down a bit. Yeah.
So there's a stunning array of life in soil. I mean, it's absolutely staggering. A handful of soil contains millions of individuals and thousands of different species of all microbes of, bacteria and viruses and fungi and nematodes and all sorts of things that you probably last heard about when you were doing biology at school. And they create this, complex web of life. I mean, in the simple terms, we know that these are things, the bacteria in the soil, what determine the nitrogen cycle, right? They capture nitrogen, they put it into the soil, and that's fundamental for life. Without that, plants don't grow. They have a huge impact on moisture as well. There have been all sorts of experiments to sort of take life out of the soil, sterilize the soil, and then you see the moisture in the soil absolutely plummets by up to 90%. So, the major building blocks of life, water, carbon, nitrogen, completely determined by the life in the soil. And we know almost nothing about it. Less than 1% of many of those groups of species are known, have been documented, right? It's a big sort of determines life on Earth, and we know nothing about it. You don't have to necessarily understand all the thousands of different species in order to restore them, but certainly many farmers have a pretty good understanding of how to, when their soil's healthy, when it's in good shape, and what sort of practices, applying manure, for example, and how that can help to increase the life in the soil, and how that then contributes to their productivity.
Mm-hmm. For many of us, when we talk about farming and improving soils, all that we know is you need to put some fertilizer into it, and you witness maximum production. So, but we're talking about improved agricultural land health. What does this look like in practical terms, and perhaps maybe talk about the value addition, which could be sort of the motivation for people to get into it.
It's pretty good to step back and look at not just one issue, but look at the bigger picture, which is, if we talk about an umbrella term like agroecology or regenerative agriculture, there's different terms around, and they, different countries use different terms in different ways. But broadly speaking, these are practices that essentially work by, recognizing, first of all, that farming is essentially a modified natural system. And so the way to maintain productivity in the long term, and the long-term sustainability and the long-term resilience, is to work with that nature. That's not to rule out external inputs at all. Some people would argue that that's an option, but it's more about using external inputs in a slightly different way, thinking differently about how farms are managed, protecting the biodiversity that protects the crop, using fertilizer to ensure that you're maintaining soil health, not only thinking about directly applying nutrients purely for the that might sound a bit abstract, a bit idealistic, but we're seeing long-term depletion of soils in many countries, and in the long term, that's not good for the agriculture sector. This is why agribusinesses are also getting on board and seeing that actually often it's their products that are jeopardizing the long-term viability of their own industry, and they need to think about this differently, work with farmers and work with ministries of agriculture to shift the emphasis a little bit, to make sure that we're looking at really sustaining productivity in the long term.
Mm-hmm. The age-old excuse has always been that this kind of work is easier to achieve when you are a subsistence farmer doing 3 acres, 4 acres, maybe 5 acres or less. And that the sort of intensified commercial agriculture that we are witnessing today, and which is the main culprit, that it's not possible to bring this sustainability models to commercial agriculture. Are there any examples, maybe somewhere else in the world, that could point to the possibility of this?
No, absolutely. I mean, there's 2 approaches that stand out in my mind, which are practiced on a huge scale actually around the world. One of them is agroforestry, which is also pretty well known in Kenya. which is where you integrate trees into your cropping system, and the trees enrich the nutrients, might provide additional mulching and so on. The other one is conservation agriculture, which combines reducing tillage and diversifying crops and maintaining ground cover and so on. I wouldn't like to go as far as prescribing a particular approach for a particular area. That needs to be figured out locally with farmers and others. But broadly speaking, these approaches are working quite well on quite a large scale around the world. Actually, the area that's under conservation agriculture, the area of arable land, is, I can't remember the exact percentage, but it's a ballpark around 10% of all agricultural land worldwide, or approaching that certainly. And a lot of that is on large farms. I think often large farmers, it's crucial to show the way forward. They're the ones that can have bigger influence on supply chain. You do need a change in practices, a change in the products you're applying, sometimes maybe a change in the varieties that you're growing. It requires sometimes new training. There's quite a lot that comes with that. You can justify that in the long term because you can show, as I said earlier, higher productivity and also lower risk. So there's long-term advantages, but sometimes there are short-term barriers and costs, and it's often easier for the bigger farmers to absorb those costs compared to, say, a smallholder like you've described on 2 or 3 hectares. And so sometimes those bigger farmers are the ones that can drive the way forward and help to sort of put in place the infrastructure, the resources, the supplies, and develop the practices to give others confidence.
Mm-hmm. Looking at it from the macro level, where we need to do policy, we need to create the environment, what kind of incentives are necessary to facilitate this kind of transition?
We just recently published a report which is looking at this. It's called Common Ground, and it's really looking at the idea of common ground being not only the ground itself, which is of course common to sustainable farming, but it also looks at the issue of soil health as being a common interest between conservationists and farmers and agriculturalists. And one of the things we look at in there is when you start reviving that soil biodiversity that I mentioned, when you start restoring land health, the benefits go beyond the farm to farmers' benefit. Farmers can see increased productivity because of accumulation of nutrients and moisture in the soil. But you often see, especially when it's applied at a large scale, you start to see quite big impacts on recharge of aquifers, on restoring biodiversity within the wider landscape. That can have benefits. I mean, it's practiced on a large scale around East Africa, for example, to reduce the risk of landslides, for example, around Mount Elgon. There's a lot of good practice there, or to reduce flood risks downstream, and so on. And so we need better quantification of those benefits to society. And then we can start talking to people about, this is a service that you're enjoying for free. If you want to secure that service, or if you want to revive that service, that you should be willing to pay something. And that's a conversation we can have. Once we can put figures on it, we can start looking. So there's quite a few examples around the world of particularly flood control, where farmers are given a small incentive, which makes it easier for them to modify their practices in order to stabilize soils, in order to lock more moisture in the soil, in order to reduce the risk of flooding downstream, because of course the consequences of flooding, say in a city downhill from them, can be quite costly.
Mm-hmm. But the report mentioned something like land is finite. How real is the threat that we really could deplete the resources as we know it, and risk to deepen even further the situation of hunger that we already have in the world if we continue like this?
Of course, land is finite. There's no doubt about that. Sometimes the figures that are looked at, they're a bit distorted. Something like nearly 40% of all the land on Earth is under food production, one way or another. But 2/3 of that is grazing land, and that includes a lot of precious grasslands, like a lot of the grasslands of Kenya, which are, reservoir for biodiversity, as well as providing an income to livestock keepers and providing, the majority of the meat that's consumed in Kenya. The cropland, which is the bit I'll report, which is about 14 or 15% of all the land, that has been expanding, and there are concerns about expansion of that. There are projections that, the rate of expansion is declining, but in the tropics, in countries, expansion of land is still a concern. And then to look to raise agricultural production through expanding the area of land rather than increasing productivity on the land that exists. And there's great potential to increase productivity, but in recent years that's been too much focused on this kind of very resource intensive model, and that's been a constraint for many farmers because they don't have access to those resources, and countries themselves don't necessarily have the resources required. I think this is where these sort of agroecological approaches really come into their own, because they can dramatically increase productivity on the existing land. And so you can't trivialize the need to raise total levels of food production in developing countries. Globally, we produce far more food than we need right now, but a lot of that food is accumulated in a few rich countries. So developing countries are going to raise their total food production in order to achieve real basic food security. The best way to do that is to start scaling up agroecological practices and raising productivity on the land that we already have.
Mm-hmm. We visited a project in Mwea, Central Kenya, Safi Organics, and they're creating organic fertilizer from rice husks, which initially was just lying there. So what is the place of local solutions like Safi Organics in creating this impact that we want? Because we want impact at scale. We want to reduce this at scale.
Mm-hmm. I think, some of these big concepts are quite globally relevant, but solutions for farmers have to come locally and from farmers. What I find interesting is how often the solutions that we're now promoting were practices that farmers themselves developed in the past and then abandoned because of pressures to move in a different direction. Now, we're not advocating to turn the clock back to ways of farming from the past, but saying actually some of those, like agroforestry, which I mentioned earlier, farming and making benefit of trees within the farmland, that is an alternative way of farming that actually can be very modern, can make the most of modern technologies and new seed varieties and new science. But ultimately, the basic principles come from farmers. And so those are locally adapted solutions. I think local experiences, farming is a risky business. I grew up farming myself, and I left farming at a certain age because it was hard work, and risky. And I don't underestimate the challenges to farmers. And so if they're the ones that are confronted with real risks, not just financial, but risks to their life and their livelihoods and their heritage, then they have to be the ones that are in the driving seat in identifying solutions that they're comfortable with and that work for them. But of course, we have to support them with the best science we have, with incentives where that's relevant, developing new products where they're required, and of course, supporting them with the right kind of policies.
Mm-hmm. So would you consider this a nature-based solution? And they say they add a formula to their the carbonized rice husks.
The product you're talking about, I don't know it well enough to make a clear judgment on that. I'd love to go and find out. It sounds interesting. But certainly there are many forms of sustainable agriculture that qualify as a nature-based solution. Right? A nature-based solution is a solution using nature, restoring nature usually, in order to address societal benefits, often to reduce risk, to increase food and water security, etc. Right? So agroecological approaches clearly do that. Regenerative agriculture, it does that, right? It's working with farmers, or farmers working with nature, and providing these multiple benefits. As I say, it goes beyond just an individual benefit. You can increase food security, but you also have, knock-on effect on on water security, on overall resilience. You can have benefits to conservation of biodiversity, to regulating climate, and so on. So I think that's what makes these kind of approaches most attractive, is the range of services, the range of values they provide to society at large. And that's why it's a societal question. It's not only a question for farmers. I know they're in the front line, but they are of interest to society as a whole, and therefore society needs to think what they can do to enable farmers to do this.
Great. Thank you very much. I think that's it for my questions, unless you have something that you may have wanted to mention, which I haven't yet captured in the questions that I asked you.
No, that's fine. Thank you. Just tell me what you plan to do next. Were you recording this, or are you planning to write something?
Yes, we're going to do both. It's multimedia. We're going to do an article, but we're also producing a video story. So for those people who do not want to go through, an article reading, they can watch.
You're going to be showing me in this. I would have put a shirt on if I'd known.
Really?
It's fine. It's fine. I would be very grateful though if you whatever you publish, if you would send me a link so that I can also share it with my colleagues. That would be fantastic.
Yes, sure. We will do that.
Good.
We will do that.
Okay. All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Next time
you
we will do an interview on location.
Yeah, that would be perfect. Keep my contacts handy. It's good to be in touch with a journalist here in Kenya.
Yeah, sure.
All right.
Okay. Thank you, and have a good day.
You too. Take care. Bye now.
Bye.